I was heading back into town with my buddy Joe, after spending the weekend out on a frozen lake, ice fishing and drinking beer. The fish were really biting, too. Joe's SUV was stuffed to the gills with walleye and smallmouth bass. The northerly town of Kapuskasing was buried under a mountain of snow, the worst snowfall since the winter of '97. I've lived my entire life in northern Ontario, so I've seen my fair share of snow. But nothing like this. But you learn to expect the unexpected in northern Ontario. We were heading over a steep incline, enjoying a generous backdrop of pine trees painted in freshly fallen snow, when tragedy struck. We watched as 2 police helicopters landed on the small slice of highway, causing the trickles of traffic to grind to a halt. Not a good sign. This highway was the only road home. We later learned that a newlywed couple had collided with a transport truck, killing both the husband and wife. We were forced to turn around and head back over the hill, where we found ourselves driving through a modest-sized hamlet consisting of a 1 stop sign, a gas station, motel, restaurant, plus a smattering of wartime houses. Except all you could see was the pointed rooftops. The houses were completely submerged in snow. It was an incredible sight. Something you only see this far up north, and even then it was rare. Joe didn't want to stick around, waiting a good 12 hours for the road to clear. He had a wife and kids to get home to, so we pulled over wondering what our next move should be. Joe had that look in his eye. The look he gets when he's about to do something dangerous or stupid, or both. I know this look well. "Hang on," he said, "and hold tight." We turned onto a crude version of a road, the kind designated for snowmobiles, with stop signs standing a mere 3 feet tall. The road was extremely narrow. Snowbanks as high as trees were towering over us like large, looming walls of white. If anything were to approach, we'd have nowhere to go. There wasn't enough room to turn around. I was becoming increasingly uneasy. This is how people get hurt. Or worse. "Are you sure this is safe?" I asked, hating the sound of my voice. Joe ignored me or simply didn't hear me. He was busy white-knuckling the minivan through the snow-tunneled trail, the glare of the setting sun blinding us the entire time. We drove for 15 minutes, knifing our way along the icy road, which was bumpier than a wooden roller coaster. It was obvious that we shouldn't be here. The impending darkness didn't improve my mood one bit. I had a bad feeling about this. Joe stopped the van. "What's up?" I asked, not trusting the look on his face. Joe didn't answer, but I could see his mind at work, assessing the direness of our situation. "I gotta turn this thing around somehow," he finally said. I couldn't see how that was possible as we were sandwiched between 2 colossal snowbanks. Something flickered inside Joe's dark eyes. "What's that up ahead?" he asked, flashing on the high beams. "I think it's a road." We edged a bit further, stopping at this makeshift road. There were no signs or markings to be seen. In fact, this road looked worse than the one we were on. "Let's see where it goes," Joe said, cranking the wheel. As the minivan lumbered down the unmarked road, an ominous feeling swept over me. It was impossible to ignore. We were in trouble. There was no denying it. We were completely off the grid. Not even Google Maps could save us. And there was only one way to go. Straight. The road was leading us into the dark of the forest, and when you're this far north, that's never a good idea. Especially at night. That's when the wolves come out. It was looking to be a moonless night, which didn't help us one bit. Joe's hands were quivering as he clenched the wheel, keeping us from skidding into the towering snowbank. He kept assuring me we'd be alright, but I've heard that one before. Joe slammed on the brakes. You see that? He pointed. Over there. I squinted my eyes. Look, he said. Fire. Deep into the forest, I spotted a small, flickering flame, dancing blue and orange and yellow and wild. Probably a campfire. Just then, a strange and disturbing sound crackled through the night like a howling wolf. You hear that? He asked. The animal cried out again. It was the loneliest yowl I'd ever heard. There it goes again. It sounded like a wolf, except it didn't sound like any wolf I'd ever heard before, and I'd heard plenty. And whatever it was dangerously close. Wolf? I said nervously, but not believing it. As soon as those words left my mouth, a pair of glowing red eyes appeared out of nowhere. Joe stopped the car and killed the lights. Be still, he said, and I did just that. I sat motionless beside him in the car, but my hands were shaking. Those laser red eyes were approaching at an impossible speed. Reach back and grab the gun, Joe whispered. I tried, but it was out of reach. They were on his side, closer to the back. Those glowing eyes flashed on and off, and for a moment everything was still. And then from out of nowhere, the beast lunged onto the hood of the van. The two of us screamed in unison. The thing was huge, unlike any animal I'd ever seen. It looked like an overgrown German shepherd, except it was standing on its hind legs like a human. It was snarling at us, making ungodly noises and thrashing about. The creature was long and gangly, frothing at the mouth, clearly rabid. Dogman, Joe said, clearly astonished. I don't believe it. Joe gunned it, looking to run the thing over and speed away, but the wheels were caught on ice. Without warning, the beast leapt off the hood and started scratching at my door, its claws like daggers tearing the door from its hinges. It smashed through the windshield, shattering it into a million pieces. With its dog-like face twisted in rage, the thing took a swipe at me. Its long, toothy claws just inches from ripping my eyeballs from their sockets. The SUV shook, spilling the cooler of dead fish. The smell was atrocious, but the Dogman disagreed. Before it could rip my throat with its curvy claws, the creature turned from me and trampled to the back of the van, where it was devouring the fish in seconds flat. Its muzzle turned blood red. Watching it lick the fish guts from its paws was sickening. This isn't how I wanted to die. The Dogman's razor-sharp teeth were on full display. The insidious brute seemed hell-bent on killing us both. We were, in fact, the main course. It took a tentative step toward us, licking its filthy face. I gave Joe a look that said, "Nice knowing you, pal," when out of nowhere came an ear-ringing blast, striking the creature in the shoulder. The thing screamed in protest, then came another shot, hitting the beast square in the chest. Blood and gore spilled like wine across the interior of the SUV. "Someone's shooting at it," Joe proclaimed. 3 more shots rang out. The creature snarled, wiped the fleshy cartilage from its bloodied face, then attacked. Another shot went off, which went wide, but it was enough to send the beast scurrying back into the woods. "Holy hell," Joe said in a shaky voice. Without a second thought, he pulled his seat back as far as it would go, then shimmied his way into the back of the van and grabbed his gun. "We're gonna need this." All of a sudden, it was freezing. With the vehicle off and the windshield busted in, it was an igloo inside the van. "It's getting cold in here," I said, shaking uncontrollably, a large plume of steam escaping from my face as I spoke. I was in shock. I had no idea what the thing was, but it damn near killed me. The scene inside the minivan was that of a horror movie, and the smell was even worse. I tried opening the door, but it wouldn't budge. Joe tried his door with the same results. We were stuck. I'd slice myself to shreds before I got halfway through my windshield. Joe's door had a bullet hole where the handle should be. We'd have to escape through the back. Blood and guts and fish bones and all. It was gruesome, but we did it. Once outside, I scanned the area, searching for that dog creature that almost killed me, but it had vanished. Joe's shotgun was aimed at a speck of light approaching from straight ahead. A car. Within minutes, we were greeted by a Volkswagen minibus. It stopped directly in front of us. The driver got out and ran toward us carrying a sniper rifle wearing a belt of ammunition. He spoke fast and with purpose, checking his surroundings while doing so. "You saw it. You did, didn't you? Excellent. Which way did it go, by the way?" This guy made Clint Eastwood look like a Boy Scout. I honestly thought he was going to kill us. He frowned as he surveyed the scene, then he shrugged. "I suppose you'll be needing my help." He ran to the bus and opened the hatch, exposing an array of military-style weapons, to the likes of which I had only seen in the movies. "Holy hell," Joe said, clearly impressed. I remained quiet, unsure what to make of this heavily armed, red-headed stranger, who literally just appeared out of nowhere to save our lives. But there seemed to be no other choice. Whoever he was, he drove us back to his cottage, regaling us with the history of the Dogman creature. He told us some pretty tall tales. Apparently, he's a Dogman hunter. His name's Patrick. He says he's never captured one, but claims to have seen 4 or 5, wounding 2 of them. Pesky bastards, he says. Hard to kill. He'd been hunting the one that attacked us for weeks. Apparently, it's been mutilating deer and coyotes, as well as regular cats and dogs all winter long, leaving their salvaged remains scattered along the side of the road in people's backyards. The locals were starting to panic. Joe and I texted home. Then we stayed up all night talking about Dogman. I was having a hard time coming to grips with all this, seeing as how I almost just died at the hands of one of them. Joe, on the other hand, was enthralled. The next day we drove back to the SUV to inspect the damage. When we arrived, the van was completely dismantled and destroyed. It lay in ruins. Everything inside had been ravaged and plundered. "This isn't right," Patrick said. "There must be an explanation." We scanned the surrounding area for over an hour and came up empty-handed. A fresh blanket of snow had fallen overnight, making tracking next to impossible. The disappointment on Patrick's face was palpable. Reluctantly, we hopped into his microbus and he drove us home with our tails between our legs, where we arrived a day late and short 1 SUV. We stayed in touch with Patrick going forward. Joe, coming from a long lineage of seasoned hunters, was intrigued by this Dogman creature. Naturally, I was skeptical. I'm fairly certain that beast meant to eat me. The last thing I wanted to do was volunteer to go searching for it. Yet, unbeknownst to me, this was the making of a team of hunters. Dogman hunters. Still, amidst all the excitement, a feeling of trepidation had stolen over me. There was a lesson to be learned from all this. A lesson lost on my gun-toting counterparts. Some roads are best untraveled. Especially in northern Ontario, where anything can happen. And usually does. Many months had passed since I was nearly pulverized by the creature in the woods. I was with my buddy Joe when it had happened up in northern Ontario. We'd gotten ourselves lost in the dark of the forest, where monsters are known to prowl in the shadows of towering trees. Up here, Monsters exist. Ultimately, it was Patrick who saved us. Patrick had been tracking the thing for weeks, prior to saving our hides. According to him, the creature is a result of top-secret government experiments, dating back to the 1940s. He claims there are others, but none as dangerous as Dogman. We searched high and low for the creature in the woods, but to no avail. By the end of March, our band of Dogman hunters grew weary. Surely the beast was dead. The northerly town of Kapuskasing enjoyed a brief period of normality. No more missing kittens. No more mutilated animal carcasses discarded in people's yards or left on the side of the road for the crows to pick apart. Life moved on. People forgot. Unfortunately, we did too. We let our guard down and it cost us. Big time. We'd become fast friends. Hanging out at Patrick's cabin by the lake was a nice pastime on long weekends. Last weekend was no different. Except, of course, that it was different. It was a complete catastrophe. "Go grab us some firewood," Patrick said, his thick French accent. Him and Joe were huddled by the campfire, warming their hands over the flickering flames, drinking beer. The evening was cool and breezy. The grass was wet from the previous night's rainfall. The moon hung like a bowling ball, big and round and full of holes. I forced myself off the patio chair and went in search of firewood. Behind the cabin, nearing the rim of the forest, I caught whiff of something foul. A mixture of grease and wet fur. I gagged, fingering it was a bear. I picked up the pace. The last thing I wanted was to be bear food. Something shot through the dense woodland a stone's throw from where I was standing, making my hair stand on end. Then, it released a desperate howl. The sound filled me with dread. That's no bear. I scanned the vicinity, cursing myself for not bringing a flashlight. All I could see was lake and forest. The feeling that I was being watched was impossible to ignore. Twigs snapped. I spun around like a superhero, two laser red eyes peering at me through the thick of the brush. Dogman. I scampered back to camp like a scared puppy. Patrick was yammering on and on about his precious Habs, and why they'll do better next year. He was furious. Never mess with a French Canadian when it comes to hockey, especially when you're dealing with the Montreal Canadiens. "Guys," I said, dropping the wood in front of the fire. Patrick ignored me. I tried my luck with Joe. "Joe!" I cried. "Something's out there!" That caught their attention. In this part of the world, when someone utters that phrase, you better take notice. Joe and Patrick sat upright. Before I get another word in, the creature in the woods howled. The sound ricocheted off the frozen lake like a fresh breeze. It sounded close. "Oh, crap," Patrick slurred, his face twisted in torment. This is a man who prides himself on being prepared, which none of us were at that moment. "Joe," he snapped, "go grab the guns." Joe stood up abruptly, the lawn chair stuck to his backside like something out of a Winnie the Pooh movie. He stumbled and fell face first into the soggy ground. Not his shining moment. Patrick cursed in French. "Fine, I'll do it myself," he said, and hurried towards his heavily armed microbus. Something growled, deep and guttural. Joe shot me a look that said, "Let's go," and we raced to the safety of the cabin, slamming the door behind us. "Patrick, better hurry," Joe said, gasping for air, his face white as milk. We scooted to the window, which overlooked the driveway. Patrick was fumbling for his keys, trying to unlock the hatch. He dropped the keys, and one could imagine the cocktail of cuss words coming from his mouth at that moment. Nobody swears like the French. Our beating hearts sounded like bombs in the otherwise dead silent cabin. Our eyes were glued to Patrick, who'd retrieved his precious car keys. As Patrick was opening the trunk, something lunged in front of the cabin window. We all screamed in unison. Dogman. The beast was hideous. It scowled at us through the frosted glass, exposing an artery of jagged white teeth, its muzzle drenched in drool. It stood on its muscular hind legs, flexing its jangly claws inches from our face. I gasped. This was the Dogman that nearly tore me to shreds a few months earlier. The door handle turned as the creature clawed at the cabin door, trying to get inside. The beast roared, sending shivers down my spine, and it crashed into the door. Once again, my life flashed before my eyes. The creature in the woods had come back, and it was going to finish me off. Shots rang out, sounding like a million volts of thunder. Joe and I dropped to the floor and ate dust. Outside, Patrick was whooping and hollering and cussing in French. Joe stood up and peeked outside. The look he gave me wasn't encouraging. More shots were fired, and I shot to my feet like a firecracker. Patrick's infamous Chuck Norris grin was plastered across his freckled face. In his hands was a semi-automatic rifle. The dog-like creature jumped on top of the microbus, screaming in protest, and before Patrick could take aim, the beast flew off the van and tackled him to the ground. "No!" I cried out. Terror enveloped me. My hands were shaking, my legs were butter. Joe grabbed the 12-gauge shotgun off the wall, cocked it, then, using the butt of his weapon, he smashed through the window and pointed the weapon. "Damn it," he said. "I can't get a line on the thing." Meanwhile, Patrick was being mauled. The menacing mutt had pinned him to the ground and was tearing him to shreds. The creature's face was a bloodied mess. Its claws clenched around Patrick's neck, squeezing the life from him. Patrick, reaching desperately for his weapon, was covered head to toe in scratches. Fury found me. If this creature thinks it can feast on my friend, it's got another thing coming. I found a Smith & Wesson lying on top of Patrick's dresser. It would have to do. I opened the cabin door, took aim, and fired. The creature collapsed head first on top of Patrick, who quickly freed himself. He found his semi-automatic and went berserk. Joe and I stood transfixed as a bouquet of bullets pulverized the Dogman. Blood and guts and entrails exploded from its chest like spaghetti hitting a fan, covering the beast head to toe in gore. The creature shrieked. Its crimson teeth glistened under the pale moonlight. It took a tentative step back, wiped the blood from its muzzle, then attacked again. With one quick swipe, the beast tore off Patrick's arm. "Pat!" Joe proclaimed. Joe rushed outside and shot the creature in the back, and Patrick fell from its grip like a sack of stones. The beast was caked in red. It looked at Joe and charged. Joe flew into the cabin head first, making it just in the nick of time. The cabin door groaned as the beast slammed into it, and the door was on its last legs. Patrick was crying for help. "Oh, we gotta save him," I said in between bouts of hysteria. Joe was trembling. He'd nearly been Dogman food, I know the feeling. The animal was clawing at the door, grunting. "The freezer," I said. "Of course," Joe said, reading my mind. "Dogs like food, especially meat, something this cabin has plenty of." I found a pack of frozen meat steaks from the freezer. The creature was crouched over Patrick, ready to finish him off. I whistled, stealing his attention, then tossed the meat out the door. The beast started sniffing the offering. Its tongue was dripping with blood. Patrick's blood. The Dogman raised its ugly head and attacked the steaks like a hungry bear. And meanwhile, Patrick's intestines spilled across his blood-stained sweater as his lifeless body lay on sodden soil next to an arm that moments ago belonged to him. The monster was gnawing away on the frozen flesh, grunting and groaning. The sound was sickening. Joe cocked and fired. The shot went wild. "Damn it," he said, shaking his head in dismay. The dog creature dropped the meat and looked at me with venom. I shot the thing square between its eyes. Kablam! Blood exploded from the beast's head in every direction, and I fired again, hitting in the leg. By now I was fuming. Vengeance was mine. The creature dropped to its knees. Fresh blood ran from its face. My eyes darted towards Patrick, who was barely hanging on by a thread. Miraculously, he'd managed to prop himself up against the back of the van. He was panting. Blood was pouring out of him like wet paint. The creature cried out, sending a wave of chills down my spine. And something called back. And then another. There were others. "There must be more of them," I said, barely recognizing the sound of my voice. The howling continued, a pack of Dogmans filling the endless night with song. Joe came up behind me. His eyes told me everything I needed to know. "On 3, he whispered. Joe counted, and on 3 the door swung open. Joe and I jumped inside, shooting the beast again and again, its body obliterated by the onslaught of ammunition. The Dogman floundered, but somehow held its ground. Finally, as our attack persisted, the creature retreated back into the thick of the forest, leaving a trail of blood and matted fur behind. And suddenly, the world went still. Patrick whimpered. "He needs a doctor," I said. "Fast." Joe called 911 while I stood next to Patrick, holding his one and only hand. It was iceberg cold. He was leaking a tremendous amount of blood. His eyes were barely open, his breathing shallow. Joe arrived with first aid. We tended to Patrick the best we could, but his prospects weren't good. This far north, ambulances are not waiting around the corner. They don't come on a whim. It took an hour before the helicopter arrived, and Patrick was flown to the nearest hospital. The cops showed up soon thereafter with a boatload of questions. Apparently they were acutely aware of this Dogman creature, and had been for some time. This didn't make me feel better. The thing was still lurking in the forest, not far from where we were standing. Joe and I sat around the fire until the sun came up. There was no sleep for us that night. We tried to convince ourselves that Patrick would be fine. He's the toughest guy we knew. If anyone could survive an assault of that magnitude, it's him. Meanwhile, we kept a close eye on the edge of the forest, waiting for the creature from the woods to return. Patrick called the following day. And sadly, the doctors couldn't save his arm, but they did save his life. He seemed in good spirits, but was heavily sedated and unable to talk for long. The weight of the world fell from our shoulders. I wouldn't worry too much about Patrick. Knowing him, he's plotting his revenge as I type this. And I certainly wouldn't put it past him. Word travels fast in the north. The town of Kapuskasing was once again placed on high alert. People prepared. There are creatures in the woods. Creatures that rip limbs from your body. Creatures that sink their teeth into your flesh and claw at your throat. And not just one. There are others. That said, there's only one monster on my mind as I finish typing this story. The creature who came back from the forest. Dogman.